Aquaman 2 is now in our rearview mirror. Still in theaters. It's still making some money. You know what? It might even, remember, I predicted it would be the first DCEU film in over 5 years to make $400 million. I thought I might have been wrong, but it looks like maybe it will get to that $400 million mark. Beat that Black Adam record. You go. But it's not, that's it now. We have no more DCEU movies that will ever open again. So how will we look back on the DCEU? And that is the topic of today's Mint Mobile Hotline question of the day. Listen, guys, if you've got a question for our show and you'd like to hear your voice on our show, go ahead and call our Mint Mobile Hotline anytime 24/7 at 951-268-4259. And today's question is specifically about how do we look back on the DCEU? Check it out.
Hello, John. This is Isaiah. And my question to you is, what is the legacy of the DCEU now that it's over? It has so much potential and promise, but it never lived up to it. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Thanks for all you do.
All right, Isaiah, thanks a lot for calling that in. And boy, isn't that a loaded question. What is the legacy of the DCEU? It is unfair yet unavoidable to compare the life run of the DCEU with the MCU. I concede it's not fair, but it is nonetheless unavoidable. They were running at the same time. They were both trying to create giant shared cinematic universes with larger-than-life superheroes. One appealed to the critics, audiences, and box office, and one did not. And I'm really torn on this. For those of you guys who watched me for a period of time, you know this is always a tricky subject for me because other than Harley Quinn, I have liked every single DCEU movie. Every single one. Some more than others. But I like even, the Will Smith Suicide Squad. I admit that was a hot mess of a movie, but I'd be lying to you if I didn't tell you I had fun. I thought it was still fun. Could have been better. Should have been better. But even that I thought was fun. Oh, yeah, I also didn't like Wonder Woman 1984. Okay, so two of them that I didn't really like. But take what you personally like and dislike and put it aside and try to answer the question, what is the legacy of this thing going to be? And I think ultimately it's going to be unfilled potential. I think that ultimately will be the legacy of the DCEU. And if you had to point to any one spot where maybe it all, and Rob, I'd love to know what you think about this. If I had to try to pinpoint or point out one spot where maybe this is where everything came off the rails, it might have been after Batman versus Superman came out. It is well known now that there was a meeting of top Warner Brothers executives who did not like the way that movie turned out. I still liked it myself. I had fun with it, and there was serious discussion about removing Zack Snyder before Justice League was going to get made. And they decided it was going to be too expensive to remove him at that point because the movie was supposed to start shooting the following month. And I think that might be the turning point. Now, remember, I say this as somebody who I have liked every single Zack Snyder movie other than Sucker Punch and now fucking, what's it called?
Rebel Moon.
Rebel Moon. I did not like Rebel Moon at all. But those are the only two. Every other Zack Snyder film I've really liked. But I cannot help but wonder what would have been if the people at Warner Brothers who, right or wrong, felt that Zack was going in a direction they didn't want their thing to go, and that wasn't working. And they just said, yeah, it's going to hurt that we were supposed to go into production next month, but we need to make a change. I'd be curious to know what would have happened there. I'm not saying that the ultimate failure of the DCU was Zack Snyder's fault. Not at all. But clearly the studio and one of their key filmmakers were on different pages. And instead of just deciding to part ways and go with one direction, they kind of created this tension. And unfortunately, Rob, I think as people look back now on the DCEU, one of the big things isn't going to be talking about how great Man of Steel was, or what a surprise success Wonder Woman, the first one, was, or the billion-dollar achievement of Aquaman. I think it's going to be about how toxic the fandom got. I think it's going to be about the release the Snyder Cut discussions. I think it's going to be about a lot of that stuff. And it's unfortunate because there were so many building blocks there. And again, I think they came out of the gate super strong with Man of Steel. I think they made a mistake not doing a Man of Steel 2 and trying to jump right into Batman versus Superman. Sure, but I still thought the movie worked. I thought the extended version was even better. But for whatever reason, Rob, the avalanche of fan support that came out to support all the MCU stuff never materialized for DCU. And I've said this for a long time. You put out a movie called Batman versus Superman. In its sleep, that movie should be potentially a $2 billion film. $1 billion in its sleep, but potentially a $2 billion film. That film underperformed. And despite coming off of Man of Steel, I don't know. Guys, we want to take a second to thank a sponsor of this video, Mint Mobile. On average, it takes about 30 days for a person to break their New Year's resolution. So if saving money was on your 2024 list, your odds aren't looking that great. Luckily, I have a 100% guaranteed way to save you money this year. Just switch to Mint Mobile. For a limited time, wireless plans from Mint Mobile are $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan. That's unlimited talk, text, and data for $15 a month. I've told you guys many times that after switching to Mint Mobile, I am spending less than a third on my cell bill than I used to with a major carrier. Say goodbye to your overpriced wireless plans, jaw-dropping monthly bills, and unexpected overages. All Mint plans come with unlimited talk and text plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. And don't worry about having to change phones or numbers. Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all your existing contacts. So guys, to get this new customer offer and your new 3-month unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/Campea. That's mintmobile.com/Campea. Cut your wireless bills to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/Campea. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. Rob, when you look back, I say unfulfilled potential. When you look back now and looking 5 years in the future, how do you think we're going to be looking back at the DCU, and what is this legacy going to be?
Okay, to follow up on what you were saying, I think that what happened to the DCEU can be squarely blamed on Kevin Tsujihara's leadership at the studio and the fact that they wanted to make a lot of money quickly. They looked at what Avengers was making. They're like, oh, we should make that kind of money. The biggest mistake they made was they didn't make a Ben Affleck Batman movie before Batman v Superman.
Or a Man of Steel 2 before.
Or Man of Steel 2, because they wanted money. They thought, we want Avengers money, and it's like they meticulously built the MCU. Man of Steel, while maybe it didn't make the $1 billion they hoped, certainly a respectable film. Zack Snyder's vision, I think you and I are both Man of Steel fans. If they had followed that movie up with a Ben Affleck Batman movie that he directed, took on the Terminator, whatever they were going to do at that point, you established that Batman character, and then I know they introduced Wonder Woman after. They didn't know if she was going to work or whatever. The studio started to interfere. They interfered in David Ayer's Suicide Squad, hiring a trailer company to cut it. The studio suddenly got cold feet because they were leaning into an AT&T merger. Everybody wanted to up their bonus. They wanted to make quick cash, and they didn't want to take the time that needed to be taken to lay down the foundations that the MCU meticulously laid down. If you want to, don't just look at their profits. They got 23 movies out of the Infinity Saga. This was a no-brainer. You're coming off of Nolan's Batman trilogy. They're at the height. Then going into Superman, Man of Steel, great move. You bring Superman back. You establish him as firmly in the quote-unquote real world. You make sure that Superman is now a dangerous-to-know character, world-destroying engines. You know, he saves billions of people. If you had then pivoted and given us Ben Affleck's Batman, made him awesome, and then pitted them against one another, the whole thing would have changed. The whole thing would have changed. But Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, wanted to do too many things because they couldn't make the Avengers of the Justice League yet, but they tried, let's give you Wonder Woman, let's give you Doomsday, let's give you Luthor, let's give you all of these things. And it's like, why do you have to overstuff this movie? Because nothing you gave us was entirely satisfying. You could have done a movie, you could have introduced, if you'd made a Batman movie, that's where you introduce Wonder Woman. No Superman. You introduce Diana Prince. You introduce Gal Gadot. She doesn't even have to show up as Wonder Woman. She's just Diana Prince, doing her thing. And Batman's like, who is this person? And she has. Can you imagine if they introduced Gal Gadot in a Batman movie, and then you saw her show up as Wonder Woman in Batman v Superman with a people would have gone bananas. You would have made $1 billion. They didn't take the time because that studio administration was not good.
Yeah,
it was the leadership at Warner Brothers that effed it up. And Zack Snyder was a victim of it all. David Ayer was a victim of it all. And the entire DCEU was a victim of greedy people that were looking at their parachutes from the AT&T merger. They screwed that whole thing up.
Whenever the topic of studio interference comes up, you know where I'm going to go with this.
Right.
There is no studio that does more studio interference than Marvel. So it wasn't really the studio interference wasn't the problem. It was the wrong people interfering. It was the people not having the vision that, say, a Kevin Feige had.
Right, but I think the problem was they weren't looking at they had lost sight of what they were even doing. They were just thinking about money and profits, and they were thinking about corporate. So this was something that was even in front of the movies they were making. It was almost, I guess now we have to make movies. So it wasn't even about their interference came later. They made a wrong decision in terms of how they were going to handle this from the very beginning.
But couldn't an argument be made, because I agree with most of what you're saying, couldn't an argument be made, though, that, okay, we all believe that the next film coming out of Man of Steel being Batman vs. Superman was a mistake. But could an argument not be made that if they simply made that movie great, it ultimately may not have mattered that much? Because, remember, too, Mad Max director, George Miller, he was going to start a new DC universe
Justice League Mortal.
And start with Justice League altogether. I mean, so full agreement, it was the wrong decision. But while you and I are big fans of Man of Steel, there's a lot of people out there, even in the live chat right now, saying Man of Steel sucked. A lot of people didn't like Man of Steel, right? There was just, the movies themselves just never appealed to the audience the way the Marvel films appealed to the audience. And I don't know if that was a matter of tone. A lot of people complain about the color palette. Okay, yeah, the color palette was not a good decision on the color palette. That was not the make or break difference between people liking the movie and not liking the movie. Some people complained that it was a little too dour. I know you've pointed out before, and I really love your analogy of it. It's like when you watch one of these movies, you can make them any kind of movie you want, but you've got to bring joy to it as well. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of complaints that a lot of those movies lacked the joy element or whatever. What other factors could they be?
Well, I think the way that Jonathan Kent died really hurt Man of Steel. There's a lot of people going, why would you let your father die in a tornado when you could...
I diametrically oppose that. I think it was a brilliant decision, but most people do agree with me.
Well, the things I think the way it was handled might have been kind of stupid, but Jonathan Kent had to die. Like, he has to die. But the way he died, in like, they're looking at each other and there's a tornado, why did he even have to be there? If he wasn't there to rescue his father...
He had to save the dog.
Yeah, I mean, I know. It's just, and that mistake, and then everybody talking about, well, Superman can't kill. It's like, come on. So there was mistakes made, but I still think it was a studio regime that didn't have faith enough in what they were doing, and they got too greedy and they wanted money too fast, because they had to deal with shareholders going, well, why aren't we making the kind of money that Marvel's making with the Avengers? And one of our viewers just said, why not make a Flash movie? I agree. If they had shifted everything, if they got Wonder Woman made, a Batman movie made, and a Superman movie made, if the Trinity was made, and then they made Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, and even if you made a Flash movie, which took 1 million years to make, and then you led up to the Justice League movie, it might have been, if they had done that, and they had Zack Snyder make Man of Steel, it could have been very different, because then you could have allowed Zack Snyder to make a 3-hour Justice League movie, because the characters would have already all worked. Wonder Woman would have made $900 million. A Batman movie that Ben Affleck directed probably would have made $1 billion, but they didn't go that way. And I think it was the studio regime.
You know what was missing from Man of Steel, when I keep looking back at that movie, is to bring joy, maybe they should have leaned in more on the Clark Kent, the really dorky Clark Kent. If they leaned into that,
I wouldn't have liked that personally.
But because, like, I think like me and Ryan were talking about the other day, like their characters were too the same. The Superman and Clark Kent in that movie.
We're a little too similar.
And there
Yeah.
also wasn't enough Clark Kent.
Yeah, we needed
like he didn't
that
go to
nerdy-
Metropolis, and like we didn't see him. I mean, part of the fun of Superman is trying to protect his Superman identity. He didn't necessarily have to be dorky, but you didn't have that dichotomy.
But here's the other thing too. We mentioned, and again, I agree with you. The right path would have been to do the Superman movie, the Ben Affleck Batman movie, maybe even then a standalone Wonder Woman movie. But if those movies had been equally mixed received as Man of Steel, would it have actually helped anything?
No.
I mean, at the end of the day, like you always point out, Rob, at the end of the day, the movie's got to be great, right? At the end of the day, the movie's got to be great. And for whatever reason, studio interference, I mean, talking about Kevin Tsujihara, I mean, one of the big stories too, I remember back when they were making Justice League and Joss Whedon was now in charge. Joss Whedon went to Warner Brothers. This goes to your point. And said, we need more time because you asked me to make all these changes. We need more time. We need to push it into the following year. And Kevin Tsujihara, this was in Deadline, made the executive decision, no, it has to come out this calendar year because the box office, whatever it was going to be for that movie, was directly tied to his personal bonus check that he was going to
that
get
A&T merger.
if it came out that year. But not if it came out the following year. So he made a personally selfish choice to say nope. And then, I mean, there were a lot of problems with that Justice League movie, but that's just one example.
I mean, yeah, and I just think that if they had planned and done a Batman movie and planned things like introducing Gal Gadot as like a woman that actually ensorcelled Bruce Wayne, like, oh my God, this woman's amazing. But we knew.
In fact, you used the word ensorcel.
Well, we knew, we would know that she's Wonder Woman, but he wouldn't. The audience would have loved that. The audience would have loved that this character.
If they did it well.
If they did it well. But then what would have been so cool is if and then when she shows up, because she's great in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. It's so fun when they go to that party at Luthor's place, and she meets her. Batman meets her, and she takes his computer and runs off with it. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, but it's like, let's put in Doomsday. If they had just concentrated on those three characters and made it fun, that movie is those Zack Snyder movies need more fun in them. They're so like oppressive. It's like, can I smile? Can I have fun?
So let's get to the bigger question though. Then, 5 years from now, as we all look back at the DCU, ultimately, as we look at the movies, not that we wish we would have gotten or what order they should have come, but as we look at what there was, what ultimately do you think is going to be the assessment? What's the legacy now of the DCU that we had?
Well, look, I like Man of Steel. Wonder Woman is good. Aquaman is good. You and I enjoy The Flash, which a lot of people don't, but I understand that.
I really like Blue Beetle.
And I think Blue Beetle was good too. Yeah. The problem is what people were looking for is this cohesive universe, and we don't get that. But I would dare say, for what it is, and I said this when I saw the trailers, that Zack Snyder's Justice League was effing metal. And it's like a Molly Hatchet album cover with Rosetta's Death Dealer on the horseback. I still like that. I'll be like, and I think that there's enough there to enjoy. It just doesn't give us a universe that was cohesive that we can love. I love the Suicide Squad. I think James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, that movie, but it doesn't help build a universe. But I'll tell you this, in my entire life, if you told me that I would get to see Starro depicted in a live action movie, I would have said, get out of town. I got Starro, man. As an old school JLA fan, I would get starfish at the beach and put them on my face when I was a little kid going, I'm taken over by Starro. And I saw it on a movie screen and I'm like, wow.
You know what? Again, fair or unfair, I think 5 years from now, as they look back at that era, remember, we're talking about the first three phases of the MCU. It's going to be that DC was clearly the last place runner in that race. I mean, that the MCU clearly won that. And now we enter into a new era. James Gunn's new era starting in 2025 with Superman. What's the tagline on it again? Legacy. Superman Legacy. I almost said Superman Year One. That's a different thing. So
yeah, they just need for the James Gunn. They just need to concentrate on their core, give them their own movies, so we could learn to love his versions of these characters.
Well,
then we could roll. And then we could roll because they didn't do that for the
No,
DCEU.
James Gunn has done that with every one of his movies.
Yeah.
Like even if you go back to the great movie Slither, we got to know every single one of the key characters, right? And fall in love with them. The reason the Guardians of the Galaxy worked, We got to meet every single one of those characters in the same movie, by the way, in all the same movie. They didn't have to do individual build-up movies, and we fell in love with them. Even when you look at his Suicide Squad, like we got to know and get really emotionally attached to all those characters as they go. So that's something James Gunn has a real strength at, and let's see if they can carry that through. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this video. Make sure you like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget, we have a daily podcast called the John Campea Show podcast, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app of choice. Go and subscribe to it today so it'll be there when you need it.